Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
The Pacers and Knicks partied like it was 1999 with the trip to the conference finals on the line. Also, the universe waited for how the Nuggets would respond in Game 2. And this NHL Draft Lottery could crown the Chicago Blackhawks as the brightest future in the NHL. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started.
I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
It was a Knicks playoff game, so you know it had to go down to the final possessions. There had to be some crazy calls. Two fan bases had to be upset simultaneously at some point. The Knicks pull out a 121-117 Game 1 victory in a contest that was not without its late controversy. Alex Wolf from Locked On Knicks joins me now. And Alex, I'm not going to ask you to make sense of the officiating down the stretch because that would be a fool's errand, especially in the NBA. But this was, let's just say, not the cleanest game called throughout, but especially late. On both sides, I would say, what was it, though, for you that made the difference in this game?
I mean, it's one name and one name only, as it's been the last 4 games and 4 games plus, I should say. It's not even just the last 4 for this whole season for the Knicks. It was Jalen Brunson. That was it. You know, I mean, he most clutch player maybe in the NBA right now. I mean, with the way that he's playing, I mean, every time that this team needs him to get a bucket to, you know, push them ahead, he'll do it. You know, he showed all the accountability in the last series, had really terrible first 2 games shooting the ball, and then was like, I got to do better. I got to readjust. And ever since Game 3 in Philly, he's just been on, I mean, as we saw in all the graphics and all the stats coming out on Twitter and everything, like on just an absolutely historic tear. Yeah. Not just for the Knicks, but NBA history right now with how he's playing so far at the end of round 1 and now the beginning of round 2. So for me, it's Jalen Brunson, man. The key shot making and everything else down the stretch of this game was just, it was exactly what the Knicks needed.
So playing devil's advocate here, and I know Knicks fans are going to get mad because they're like, can we just have this? Like, we haven't had any playoff success in years. Can we just have this one? I get it. But 43 points from Jalen Brunson. You get awesome games from Josh Hart and Dante DiVincenzo. They combined for 6 of 10 from 3. They both shoot over 50% while getting 24 and 25 points respectively. You shoot almost 54% from the floor, almost 48% from 3. And it's still a heart in your throat kind of finish. How concerning would that piece be for you?
I mean, I guess it would be more concerning if not for the fact that some of like the Knicks staple crops, you know, were not kind of out of whack in this game. Like, there's not going to be too many games where you have the Knicks only get 8 offensive boards and only out offensive rebound the opposing team by 1. I mean, the Pacers were not a great rebounding team during the season. And I don't think that the trend of the Knicks only out rebounding them by 7 is going to hold throughout this series. I mean, the Pacers, to their credit, they did a really good job of kind of doing exactly what they had to as far as, you know, dictating the pace in this game and everything else like that. So, you know, you give them credit where it's due in that regard. But on the same token, it's just like, you know, I don't think that certain things are going to hold for the Knicks in this series as far as the things that they're normally so good at, the out hustle, out muscle, that's not going to hold up. And they're going to come out with a game plan next game, probably trying to exploit that even more, however they can, and juice those numbers up, juice that rebounding advantage up, and do what they can to, you know, kind of control the boards, which then if you can control that offensive glass, then you can limit pacer transition. And it's just a good thing all around for your team. I was on Locked On NBA yesterday, and that was one of the things that I mentioned I think could be a big thing for the series, is using that offensive rebounding to kind of as a deterrent for the Pacers transition game and, you know, letting them get out like that. So I think the Pacers got to do that more than they probably will this series, at least that the Knicks are able to dictate. Now, granted, I think there's also a decent chance that sort of like the Cavs series last year for the Knicks, that maybe one of these games they get blown out by like 25 because the Pacers just get stupid hot and run them off the floor, and the Knicks get tired because they're running like a seven and a half-ish man rotation right now. So maybe that's on the horizon too. But I think if the Knicks just play their game throughout this series, they can, they won't necessarily need to shoot as well as they did in this game, but certainly if they can keep that up, things looked, and I mean, I'm not saying this to like crap on the Pacers or anything, but compared to last series where every single possession was a dogfight, like things looked a lot easier for the Knicks in this first game of the series on offense than they did at all in the last series. So if they're able to maintain that level of ease and comfort and can then start doing some of the other things they do really well, and we saw how they kind of clamped in on defense down the stretch of this game, I think they'll be in pretty good shape.
Stay up to date all year on the New York Knicks by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Knicks on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Sports Today your first listen. Coming up, the Nuggets offered their response to the Wolves in Game 2. Before we get to that, what we all knew about the NBA Rookie of the Year award has been confirmed. I've got a wager for you over at FanDuel, and you're going to want to pay attention to this one. I've been giving out winners. That's just all I've been doing, giving out winners. Of course, if you're a new user, you can get $150 in bonus bets with your first winning $5 bet. But you're going to want to hear about this. In the NBA playoffs, the Celtics and Cavs tip off tonight, and the FanDuel, the odds makers don't buy the Cavs. As good as Cleveland has been, FanDuel has Boston favored by 11.5 points in this one. And I think I like the line for the Celtics. I'm laying the points in Game 1. You can also check out all the lines on the other NBA and NHL playoff games, whether they be money lines on who will win, point spreads, or puck lines. FanDuel has it all. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook for myriad reasons, but chief among them is how they treat new users. Start using FanDuel today, and you can get $150 in bonus bets with just one winning $5 bet, your first one. Just head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon for $150 in bonus bets with a winning $5 bet. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook and the official sportsbook of Locked On. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You knew it. I knew it. But now it's official. Victor Wanyama is the Rookie of the Year in the NBA, with expectations through the roof. Somehow Wemby went above and beyond, which I guess makes sense because he has to duck to get under most roofs. He earned all 99 first place votes to become just the 6th ever unanimous Rookie of the Year selection. Though it hurts me that there's not, make it 100. What are we doing? He becomes the 3rd Spurs. I guess you wouldn't be able to break ties if it was 100. Anyway, he becomes the 3rd Spurs first round pick to win Rookie of the Year. Tim Duncan and David Robinson also won the award. You may have heard of those guys. Robinson is a part of that unanimous group too. The Spurs they've got a streak going. The Clippers have expressed an interest in getting the band back together next year. If you ask our Locked On Clippers host, Darian Vaziri, though, he's not all the way on board with at least one player in particular.
Paul wants to be here. He loves to be here with his family. He wears Clipper gear wherever he goes. He clearly likes represent. I mean, I don't think he does the best job representing the Clippers on the court all the time, but he clearly takes pride in being here, and I love that. He shows off the Clipper merch. He's all about it. He's a good ambassador for the franchise, and I really care about that stuff. And I have great memories with him, and he's one of the best Clippers of all-time leader in three-pointers made. Gotta love it. But he's not worth the max. Philly might want to pay him. And if I'm Paul George and I'm trying to secure a big contract, because there's a reason why the Clippers haven't re-signed Paul George. He's been extension eligible for months now because we don't want to give him a max. We've realized, look, we paid you the same amount as Kawhi, but he's way better than you at basketball. So, and Paul might just be like, well, at least I'm on the court when it matters. At least I'm on the court playing.
On the playoff ice, the Bruins went down to Florida. They were looking for a series to steal.
Okay, we've got to talk about 2 key moments in Boston's Game 1 win over the Florida Panthers in Round 2 of the Stanley Cup playoffs. This is Ian McLaren, host of Locked On Boston Bruins, and this game was scoreless through more than half of the contest. Matthew Tkachuk opened the scoring, and then similar to Game 7 against the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Bruins responded quickly. Less than 2 minutes after Tkachuk scored, Morgan Geekie came back and tied things up for the Boston Bruins. Mason Lohrei with an absolute snipe. Brandon Carlo with a rocket made it 3-1 for the Bruins. And as the Florida Panthers were pressing in the third period, Jim Montgomery made the decision to call a timeout, and that proved to be very timely as Justin Brazeau went on to score a beauty backhand Brazeau shelf to seal it 4-1. The Bruins later added an empty netter. Catch all the latest on Locked On Boston Bruins.
And on the diamond, the Phillies are just on a tear as they took down the Giants.
Fortunately, it didn't throw the Phillies off because they just kept on winning. 6 in a row now. They complete the 4-game sweep of the San Francisco Giants. Zach Wheeler was out there today, just wheeling and dealing for Zach Wheeler. Picks up his 4th win of the season. You see Bryce Harper go yard for the 2nd time in as many days. And for the 2nd time in as many days, Bryce Harper goes out there and hits a 3-run home run for you. Help that Phillies offense out big time. Unfortunately, Alec Boehm's 18-game hitting streak came to an end today as it did not fare well from the plate for Alec Boehm.
Here we go. Game 2 in Denver. And the theme tonight, if I had to pick one, no Rudy, no problem. I mean, there were times out here, Jack, and we'll get into it all. It looked like the varsity versus JV squad out there, at least early on in this one. Wolves absolutely suffocating defense. They drove Denver nuts all night long. Wolves up 8 after the first quarter, but that was only the beginning. I mean, you named it. They crushed it. Turnovers, points off turnovers, fast break points, rebounding, any special team stat you could think of, the Wolves won it. They put the Nuggets in the spin cycle, man. It was second quarter domination, 33-15. Wolves go into the locker room with the 61-35 lead, 26-point advantage. In fact, Cat and Ant alone outscored Denver 36-35 in the first half. So second half we go. Wolves got the lead as high as 32 at one point. The Nuggets' largest deficit at home in the playoffs ever, all time. However, okay, Nuggets going to 8-0 run to end the third quarter. They're down 22 going into the fourth, but it was just more of the same. Too little, too late for Denver, and your Minnesota Timberwolves have just gone up 2-0 on the defending champs in their home building, no less, after this dominating 106-80 performance. So much to break down, Jack, but let's just start with your biggest takeaways and kind of your A topics first and foremost.
Yeah, first of all, congratulations to Rudy Gobert and his girlfriend Julia, welcoming their first child, a baby boy, this morning here in Minneapolis. I think for me, the biggest thing has just got to be the way that this team set their tone with their defense. And it started there, and it ended with Anthony Edwards getting MVP chants in Denver and us hearing very loud Wolves in 4 chants in Denver. So, all the credit in the world there. And then, I think they really just stuck with their game plan, which was awesome. They really sold out to take away the Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic pick and roll. And they let Aaron Gordon do pretty much whatever he wanted to in the first part of the game. He had 13 of the Nuggets' first 17 points after scoring just 9 points in game 1. So for him to come out that way, you thought, wow, this is a great sign for Denver that, they're getting one of their role players into the game that wasn't, a really important factor in game 1. But it just did not play out that way. The Timberwolves were, incredible from start to finish on the defensive end of the floor. And I think it was just, you talked about it, no Gobert, no problem. And the fact that it was, this Timberwolves team has had a next man up mentality the whole entire season. And I think this game just kind of epitomized that when someone's down, everyone else steps up and plays a lot harder and locks in even more on what they need to do and what the role is. And, they didn't need anybody to be Rudy Gobert. They needed everybody to be the best versions of themselves. And I think that's what we got. And that's the great thing about this Timberwolves team is you want to play small, they can play small. You want to have a defense first lineup out there, they can have an elite defense first lineup out there. You want to have an offensive minded lineup out there. You have Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards and Mike Conley kind of orchestrating everything. They can do anything you want, but defensively, the result of that game, I think, Again, we talked about it. 80 points is the fewest they've allowed in a game all season. I believe it's the lowest that Denver has scored in a game all season. It's the fourth time in 6 games this season that the Timberwolves have held Denver under 100 points. And most importantly here, the Nuggets, before garbage time got started, and they finished with this too, they had 16 assists and 19 turnovers. First time all season that they've had more turnovers than assists in a game. And you rarely ever see that in an NBA game. And we'll get into more kind of how the defense went. But yeah, I think that Karl Anthony Towns too, just setting a tone, again, playing exactly the way that he did in that third quarter of game 1 and the third quarter of game 4 of that last series, where he was just really quick and decisive. Every time he caught the ball, he was doing something quick, whether he was putting it on the deck and getting downhill, or whether he was, just getting up threes. It felt like every decision that he made was the right one early in this game.
Coming up, the Chicago Blackhawks could become the NHL team of the future if the lottery goes their way. We've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, you lift your head up, and you say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much money from my friends as I possibly can. That's right, the smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime, with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. Plan countless dynamic Monopoly boards. Make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. Charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. Draft lotteries are a crapshoot. That's the point of having a lottery. They don't always support the worst teams, but every so often, the stars align. The Chicago Blackhawks have that sort of astronomical opportunity in this NHL draft. The lottery, if everything works out, could make the Blackhawks the team of the future in the NHL, as our Locked On Blackhawks host Jack Bushman discusses with our Locked On Sharks host JD Young.
Won the draft lottery last year. You've got the generational player in Connor Bedard. Seems like Bedard's on his way to winning the Calder Trophy this year. I know there's very much the Faber group, but I think Bedard ends up winning it. But what would bringing Celebrini to the Blackhawks, did that give you that 1-2 punch that we saw from the Blackhawks literally 15 years ago?
Yeah, we're going to be hoping that May 7th, 2024 treats us as well as May 8th, 2023 did, because adding Macklin Celebrini to this Blackhawks organization, I think solidifies them as the brightest future in the NHL, and I think it would surpass the Anaheim Ducks, giving them the best prospect pool in the entire NHL. And quite frankly, us Blackhawks fans could kind of use that little kick in the rear end, if you will, to get them excited about this team again. I know the San Jose Sharks fans do not want to hear that, but from a Chicago perspective, until the Bears draft last week in the NFL draft, there was little to no excitement about Chicago sports in this city. And I feel like if the Blackhawks were to win the draft lottery and get Macklin Celebrini at number 1 overall, it would be a similar vibe around the Blackhawks that the Chicago Bears fans just had recently. It would be electric and would just give the Blackhawks luxury of riches down the middle. I mean, thinking about Celebrini and Bedard as a 1-2, it's going to make a lot of people think about Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, but obviously Patrick Kane being a winger, I think this would give the Blackhawks their most promising future at the center position, maybe in franchise history, because of what Macklin Celebrini has shown us, an incredible freshman year at Boston University, and obviously what Connor Bedard did in his rookie year as well. And then not to mention Oliver Moore, who's a freshman at Minnesota that went number 19 overall last year. Frank Nazar is a true center who just might have to move to the wing, surely in a pure numbers perspective. So adding Macklin Celebrini to that prospect pool would really put the Chicago Blackhawks over the hump, and I think would kind of switch a gear in the fan base's interest. And that's been kind of needed with just how many losses this team has been accumulating these last few years. I give credit to the Blackhawks fans for still having attendance numbers be rather strong, but I can't lie to you. There isn't a ton of interest around this team in the city of Chicago other than what Connor Bedard is doing 24/7.
No, and from a Sharks perspective, right? Bringing the kid who was a former junior Shark, his dad literally works for the Golden State Warriors. Bringing him back home is why you went through this season, right? This brutal season. You had 4 different losing streaks of at least 9 games this year. And it would help, again, kind of you have that 1-2 punch of Will Smith, Macklin Celebrini. I know there's questions about Will Smith, if he's going to play center or not. I still think long-term he's probably going to be a center, but giving you that punch, especially when you have Anaheim in your own division, which is just stockpiled forwards. You have Kurt Gauthier, you've got Troy Terry, you've got there's just like a bunch, Leo Carlson, a bajillion guys that they have on their team, and that's who you have to kind of build against, right? Is kind of going forward is how are you going to compete against Anaheim's depth, and adding a prospect like Macklin Celebrini, I think would help that.
And finally, Pat Riley was asked about Jimmy Butler. His response, pretty straightforward.
Is that Jimmy trolling or is that Jimmy serious? If you're not on the court playing against Boston or on the court playing against the New York Knicks, you should keep your mouth shut.
There's that old saying, walk softly and carry a big stick. Pat Riley walks softly and carries around his championship rings. So maybe listen. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, who's in the best position to win the Stanley Cup now that the NHL is into round 2? So at least until tomorrow, stay locked on sports today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
For more episodes of Locked On Sports Today, go to our video on demand. Click on Sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.